I still remember that fateful night like it was yesterday. I had been staring at the stars for hours, lost in their infinite vastness, when a creeping sense of unease settled over me. It started as a gentle tickle in the pit of my stomach, but soon escalated into a full-blown feeling of dread that seemed to seep into every pore. The stars above seemed to twinkle with a malevolent intensity, their light casting an otherworldly glow on the dark landscape below. I felt like I was being watched by unseen eyes, and the wind carried an eerie whisper that sent shivers down my spine. It sounded like a soft hiss, a gentle susurration that seemed to come from all directions at once. The words themselves were indistinguishable, but the tone was unmistakable, a cold, mirthless laughter that made my skin crawl. I tried to shake off the feeling, telling myself it was just the product of too much time spent under the stars, but deep down, I knew something was off. The night air seemed to vibrate with an electric tension, like the moment before a storm breaks. I felt my heart pounding in my chest, and my breath came in short gasps as I struggled to calm myself down. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the feeling passed. The stars continued to twinkle above, the wind died down, and an unsettling silence fell over the landscape. It was as if nothing out of the ordinary had occurred, but I knew better. That night marked a turning point for me, a moment when the boundaries between reality and madness began to blur. Little did I know, that feeling would be the harbinger of a descent into cosmic horror that would change my life forever. The feeling intensified, growing from a nagging suspicion into a creeping dread. My rational mind struggled to comprehend the elusiveness of the threat, yet I felt an insatiable pull toward the unknown. It was as if my subconscious had taken hold, drawing me down a rabbit hole of madness that seemed impossible to escape. The stars above seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy, their light casting eerie shadows on the ground below. I felt a growing sense of disorientation, as if reality itself was unraveling before my eyes. My breath came in short gasps, and my heart pounded in my chest like a drumbeat. Panic began to set in, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this was somehow necessary, that some hidden truth lay just beyond the edge of perception, waiting for me to stumble upon it. My mind wrestled with the implications, trying to reconcile the rational with the irrational. But every attempt at logic only seemed to push me further down the abyss. The wind picked up, carrying with it a faint whisper that sent shivers down my spine. It was a soft, raspy voice that seemed to be speaking in tongues, its words indistinguishable but its tone unmistakable, a cold, mirthless laughter that made my skin crawl. I felt myself becoming lost in the void of my own mind, adrift on a sea of madness. And yet, despite the growing sense of unease, I couldn't look away. The stars seemed to be drawing me closer, their light a siren's call to the unknown. I took a step forward, and then another, my feet carrying me towards some unseen destination without my conscious consent. The world around me began to distort and writhe, like a living thing in agony. And still, I pressed on, driven by a morbid fascination with the abyss that yawned before me. As the night wore on, I found myself inexplicably drawn to an abandoned observatory on the outskirts of town. An inexplicable force seemed to guide me toward its entrance, as if beckoning me into the heart of madness itself. The stars above still pulsed with an otherworldly energy, but now they seemed to be guiding my footsteps. I felt a growing sense of inevitability, as if some hidden destiny was unfolding before me. The observatory loomed before me, its windows like empty eyes staring back into the darkness. The wind died down and an unsettling silence fell over the landscape. It was as if the world itself was holding its breath, waiting for me to make my next move. I felt a shiver run down my spine as I pushed open the creaking door and stepped inside. The air within was thick with dust and the scent of decay. Cobwebs clung to the instruments, like skeletal fingers reaching out to snare the unwary. But I didn't hesitate. An unseen force urged me deeper into the observatory, my footsteps echoing off the walls as I made my way toward the heart of the building. The stars above seemed to be tracing a path for me, their light illuminating a narrow corridor that wound deep into the observatory's bowels. I followed the path, my heart pounding in my chest like a drumbeat. The air grew colder with each step, until it seemed to vibrate with an electric tension. And then suddenly, I stumbled upon a door hidden behind a tattered curtain of cloth. The door was old and worn, its surface etched with symbols that seemed to writhe and twist in the dim light. It looked like something out of a nightmare, a portal to some realm of unspeakable terror. And yet, without hesitation, I reached out and grasped the rusty handle, feeling an inexplicable pull toward the unknown. The door creaked open with a dreadful screech, revealing a void that seemed to stretch on forever into the depths of madness itself. As I stepped forward, the air seemed to thicken around me, like a physical presence that pressed against my skin. The symbols on the door appeared to shift and writhe, their colors deepening into an otherworldly hue. Without conscious thought, I took another step, and then another, until I found myself standing before the portal-like structure. It pulsed with an ethereal energy, like a living thing that seemed to vibrate with an intense power. The air around it distorted, as if reality itself was being warped by its presence. I felt a sense of inevitability, as if I was being drawn into some abyssal realm beyond the veil of sanity. Without hesitation, I stepped through the portal, and everything around me dissolved into chaos. The world seemed to unravel, like a thread pulled from a tapestry. Colors swirled together in a mad dance, and sounds that had been distant whispers grew to deafening screams. The air was filled with an electric charge, like 1,000 sparks waiting to ignite. I felt myself being pulled apart and put back together again, my sense of self fragmenting into 1,000 shards of shattered glass. And yet, even as the world around me descended into madness, I felt a strange sense of calm, like I was finally coming home to something that had been hidden deep within my psyche. The portal's energy enveloped me, a warm, golden light that seemed to seep into every pore of my being. I closed my eyes, and when I opened them again, I found myself standing in a realm unlike any I had ever known. A sky of pure crystal stretched above me, reflecting the colors of the rainbow in a kaleidoscope of beauty. The air was alive with strange, glowing creatures that seemed to be made of the very fabric of reality itself. And at the center of this realm, a figure waited for me, its eyes burning with an otherworldly power. I knew in that moment that I had crossed into the abyssal realm, and there was no turning back. The void was filled with disorienting visions and cacophonous whispers. The air grew thick with a palpable sense of dread, which seemed to seep into my very bones. My grip on reality began to slip, like sand between my fingers. I stumbled forward, blindly navigating the twisted landscape of my own mind. Every step felt like a betrayal, as if I was abandoning myself to the abyss. The whispers grew louder, a chorus of despair that seemed to emanate from every corner of the void. They spoke in hushed tones of forgotten memories, lost loved ones, and shattered dreams. The words themselves were meaningless, but the emotions behind them cut deep into my very soul. I felt like a leaf torn from its branch, helpless to stop the inexorable tide of sorrow. My thoughts grew foggy, as if the very fabric of my mind was unraveling before my eyes. I stumbled upon fragments of myself, distorted reflections that seemed to mock me with their imperfections. The more I looked, the more they multiplied until I was lost in a sea of fragmented identity. Panic set in, a cold, clammy sensation that seeped into every pore of my being. I knew I was drowning, suffocating under the weight of my own despair. And yet, even as I screamed for help that never came, I felt a strange sense of freedom. It was as if, by surrendering to the void, I had finally found the courage to let go of all that held me back. The darkness closed in around me, an endless shroud of nothingness that seemed to swallow all light and hope. And yet, even in the depths of this abyss, I knew I was not alone. The distorted landscape shifted around me, revealing grotesque, nightmarish visions that defied comprehension. I stumbled through the ever-changing terrain, desperate to find a way back to the world of mortals. Every step felt like a betrayal, as if I was abandoning myself to the abyss. The ground beneath my feet seemed to writhe and twist, like a living thing in agony. The sky above was a sickly shade of green, casting an eerie glow over the twisted landscape. I stumbled upon a city that seemed to be made of broken mirrors, each one reflecting a different version of myself. I saw myself as a child, playing with dolls, as a warrior wielding a sword, and as an old man wrinkled and decrepit. I wandered through the city, searching for a way out, but every door led to more twisted corridors and dark alleyways. I encountered creatures that defied explanation, beings made of darkness and shadow that seemed to seep into my very pores. They whispered terrible secrets in my ear, their voices like rusty hinges creaking in the wind. I stumbled upon a figure, shrouded in shadows, who spoke to me in a voice that was both familiar and yet completely alien. "You are lost," it said. "You have no way out." I asked it how to find my way back, but it simply laughed, a sound like the crackling of dry leaves. I stumbled on, driven by desperation and fear. The landscape shifted and twisted around me, revealing more grotesque visions with each step. I saw myself as a monster, devouring all in its path, as a god wielding power beyond comprehension, and as nothing at all, a mere speck of dust lost in the void. I knew I had to keep moving, no matter how impossible it seemed. I stumbled through the ever-changing terrain, desperate to find a way back to the world of mortals. But with every step, I felt myself becoming more and more fragmented, like a puzzle being torn apart by unseen forces. As I journeyed deeper into the void, I began to uncover hints of an ancient evil lurking within its depths. Twisted, inhuman creatures seemed to lurk around every corner, their presence marked by an unearthly stench that clung to my skin like a shroud. Their eyes glowed with an otherworldly light, casting an eerie glow over the desolate landscape. I could feel their malevolent presence, a cold, dark energy that seeped into my bones and chilled me to the core. I stumbled upon a twisted, nightmarish realm, where the laws of nature seemed to bend and warp in impossible ways. The air was thick with an unholy stench, a noxious fume that clung to my skin like a wet shroud. I could feel its presence everywhere, a constant reminder that I was not alone in this place. I began to notice strange symbols etched into the walls, ancient runes that seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy. They whispered secrets in my ear, their voice a cold, mirthless chuckle that sent shivers down my spine. I knew that I had stumbled upon something ancient and evil, something that had lain dormant for eons, waiting for me to disturb it. As I journeyed deeper into the void, I began to realize that I was not just fighting against an external enemy, but also against a part of myself. The darkness within me seemed to be stirring, awakening from its slumber like a beast unleashed from its cage. I knew that I had to confront it, to face my own demons and overcome them if I wanted to survive this journey. But as I looked around at the twisted landscape, I knew that I was in grave danger. The ancient evil that lurked within these depths was a force beyond human comprehension, a power that could destroy me utterly. I had to be careful, for I knew that one misstep would be my last. Memories from my past began to resurface, twisted and distorted, as if the very fabric of reality had been manipulated to conceal some terrible truth. The line between past and present grew increasingly blurred. I saw myself as a child, playing in a field filled with wildflowers. But now the flowers seemed to writhe and twist like living serpents, their petals curling into grasping fingers that reached out to snare me. I heard my mother's voice, but it was distorted, her words slurred and menacing. I saw myself as a young adult, standing in front of a mirror, staring at a reflection that was not my own. The eyes were different, the face twisted into a grotesque parody of my own features. I felt a jolt of recognition, but it was like looking at a stranger, someone who had lived a life that was not mine. I saw glimpses of events that I knew nothing about, fragments of conversations and scenes that seemed to belong to someone else entirely. The more I tried to grasp them, the more they slipped through my fingers, leaving me with only echoes of what could have been. The world around me began to distort and ripple, like the surface of a pond struck by a stone. Reality itself seemed to be unraveling, thread by thread, until I was left staring at a void that yawned open before me like an abyss. And yet, despite the chaos and confusion, I felt a sense of familiarity, as if I had been here before, in some other life or iteration of this one. It was a feeling both exhilarating and terrifying, like standing on the edge of a precipice with nothing but air beneath me. I knew that I had to keep moving forward, no matter how uncertain the path ahead seemed. For if I stopped now, if I let the world close in around me, I would be consumed by the very darkness that lurked within these twisted memories and hallucinations. The abyssal realm continued to warp and distort around me, spewing forth visions that defied human understanding. I stumbled upon a chamber filled with an endless expanse of blackness, which seemed to be watching me with cold calculation. The air was heavy with an unspeakable presence, a feeling of being utterly exposed and vulnerable. The blackness seemed to have a life of its own, pulsing with a malevolent energy that seeped into my bones and chilled me to the core. I felt myself being drawn towards the void, as if it was exerting some kind of malign influence over me. The more I tried to resist, the more it seemed to pull me in, like a moth to a flame. I knew that I had to be careful, for one misstep could mean being consumed by the abyss. As I stood there, frozen in terror, I began to notice a faint glow emanating from the depths of the void. It was a light that seemed both beautiful and terrible, like a siren's call luring me towards my doom. I knew that I had to resist its allure, for if I gave in, I would be lost forever in this endless expanse of darkness. And yet, despite my fear, I felt an overwhelming sense of curiosity, as if I was being drawn towards some hidden truth. The void seemed to be whispering secrets in my ear, secrets that only it knew, and I was determined to uncover them, no matter the cost. I took a step forward, into the heart of the abyss, and felt the darkness close in around me like a shroud. It was then that I realized that I was not alone in this desolate realm. There were others out there, beings from beyond the veil of reality, who watched me with cold calculation, waiting for me to make my next move. The void seemed to be alive, and it was coming for me. I could feel its presence lurking just beyond the edge of perception, waiting for its moment to strike. And when it did, I would be consumed by an abyssal power that would change me forever. As I gazed into the void, I encountered the first glimpse of the existential threat, an abomination born from the very fabric of reality itself. Its presence was both captivating and repellent, like a reflection in a broken mirror. The creature's form shifted and flowed like molten lava, its edges blurring and reforming into impossible geometries. Its surface seemed to ripple with an otherworldly energy, as if it were a portal to some parallel dimension or a gateway to madness itself. I felt my mind reeling, unable to comprehend the horror that stood before me. It was as if I had stumbled upon a fragment of the abyssal realm's true nature, a being that defied all logic and sanity. The creature's gaze locked onto mine, and I felt my very essence being pulled apart by its unblinking stare. It was like staring into the face of pure chaos, with no escape from the void's crushing weight. And yet, despite the terror that gripped me, I couldn't help but feel a morbid fascination with this abomination. It was as if I were drawn to it, like a moth to the flame of madness. The creature seemed to be calling to me, tempting me with secrets and forbidden knowledge. I knew that if I succumbed to its allure, I would be forever changed by the encounter. My mind would be shattered, my sanity torn asunder by the eldritch horrors that lurked within. And yet, I couldn't resist the temptation. I felt myself being drawn closer into the abyssal realm's heart of darkness. As I reached out to touch its twisted form, everything went black. When I came to, I was standing on the edge of a precipice, staring into an endless expanse of nothingness. The creature's presence still lingered within me, a whisper in my mind that seemed to be calling me deeper into the void. I knew then that I had crossed a threshold, into a realm where sanity and madness were but distant memories. I was now a part of something greater, something ancient and evil that lurked beyond the veil of reality itself. And so, I took my first step forward, into the abyssal realm's depths, ready to face whatever horrors lay ahead. For in this twisted world, I had discovered a new kind of sanity, one born from the shattered remnants of my own mind. Confronting the abomination awakened something within me, a primal fear that threatened to consume my sanity. The creature seemed to embody the darkest recesses of my own psyche, forcing me to confront the abyssal void head-on. As I stood before it, I felt my mind fragmenting into shards of terror and despair. Every memory, every thought, every sense of self began to unravel like a thread pulled from a tapestry. The abomination's presence was a living embodiment of the darkness that lurked within me, a manifestation of the deepest fears that had haunted me for so long. I saw myself as a child, cowering in the corner of a dimly lit room, unable to escape the crushing weight of my own terror. I saw myself as an adult, paralyzed by fear and doubt, unable to take a step forward without being consumed by the void. And I saw myself now, standing face to face with this monstrous creation, forced to confront the abyssal void head-on. The abomination's eyes seemed to bore into my very soul, extracting every last shred of sanity from me. I felt my grip on reality slipping, like sand between fingers, as I realized that I was staring into the abyss itself. And in that moment, I knew that I was doomed. Doomed to be consumed by the void, forever trapped in a living nightmare of my own creation. The abomination's presence seemed to grow larger, filling the room with an unspeakable horror. I felt myself shrinking, becoming smaller and smaller until I was nothing more than a tiny, insignificant speck in the grand tapestry of existence. And yet, even as I felt my mind shattering into 1,000 pieces, I knew that I could not look away. The abomination's power was too great, its presence too overwhelming. I was trapped in this living hell, forced to confront the abyssal void head-on, with no escape from the terror that lurked within me. In the end, it was not I who emerged victorious, but the void itself. Trapped in an eternal loop of horror and despair, I found myself forever bound to this realm, forced to witness the unfolding cosmic desolation as the stars above screamed in silence. The abyssal void had become my home, a prison from which I would never escape. I was trapped in an endless cycle of terror, reliving the same moments over and over again like a broken record. The abomination's presence still lingered within me, its malevolent energy coursing through my veins like liquid fire. Every moment was a reminder that I had failed, that I had succumbed to the void's crushing weight. And yet, even in defeat, I found a twisted sense of comfort. For in this realm, there was no escape from the horrors that lurked within me, no respite from the eternal screams of the damned. I was forever bound to this abyssal realm, forced to witness the unfolding cosmic desolation as the stars above screamed in silence. The universe itself seemed to have given up hope, its final moments a slow and agonizing dance towards oblivion. I watched as galaxies burned out, their stars extinguished like candles in the wind. I saw the fabric of space-time unravel, thread by thread, until all that was left was an endless expanse of nothingness. And still, I remained, trapped in this eternal loop of horror and despair, forever bound to the void's will. The last thing I heard was the sound of my own screams, echoing through the abyssal void like a chorus of the damned. And then there was silence.